This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build an online art portfolio or store to sell your work, check out Squarespace. They have stunning templates that you can customize in a matter of minutes, so you can focus more on building your online presence.
Hey guys, this is Scott Flanders and I am here at Proko Studios, where we are going to continue our Halloween demo series. And today, we are going to be sculpting Swamp Thing. These days, I almost exclusively use Aves Apoxie Sculpt. This stuff is awesome because it's been optimized for sculpting, so you have a much longer work life. A lot of the majority of the early work for games like Warhammer Fantasy and most tabletop miniature games, all of that stuff was sculpted with epoxy putties. This Aves brand, you get about a 3 to 4 hour work life before it starts to really set and become tough. And then after about 24 hours, really more about 10 to 11 hours, it becomes like rock solid. And at that point, you can use a Dremel tool on it, you can sand on it, you can use a knife, you can whittle on it in the same way you would like wood. And you can get some amazing textures in that way. It's solid. You can have it solid like a rock. In the case of Sculpey, leave it in your car and it'll start to cure and then often crumble. In the case of something like Chavant or Monster Clay, it'll melt and melt off your frame. They're good materials, but yeah, it's not exactly my cup of tea. It's strong, I can continue to work on it. It's heavy, you know, you can throw it across the room. And you know, there's something fun about that, you know. I've got a couple of sketches I created earlier over the last week or so. So here, basically like an homage to Rodin's Thinking Man, but I felt like it just wasn't exciting enough. It's an interesting idea, I may develop it further. And second up, we had a composition that's similar to the shape carving print we created last time in the first video. The pose isn't exactly heroic enough for my liking, so I'm going to be looking for some other angle, but this is close. It has some of the elements. My approach here is definitely more impressionistic. It's much more about mark making and gesture and big shapes. I'm really not very interested or concerned in texturing or like fine details. It's just not where my heart lies. We're going to start building our armature. You can see here I've got a large spool of wire. This is galvanized steel wire. I've got a couple different gauges here. Gauge is a term for, basically it's the thickness of the wire. I've got a thinner wire right here. That's very flexible. And I've got a stronger wire right here that is not very flexible. You really have to manhandle it to get it to do what you want. And I'm going to use our more flexible wire. It's just a little easier to work with. So you can get this stuff at Home Depot in the hardware section. I make a lot of trips there. That way you can get it in bulk. So initially, I'm going to want to measure out a distance of probably about like 2.5 to 3 feet, just to be safe. And I've got a pair of clippers, these very strong, husky wire cutters. It costs a little bit more money, but they give me the mechanical advantage that I'm looking for. That makes this easier to do. An important note, this wire, when you cut it, you're creating this incredibly sharp pinch point. And you know, when you're bending your wire and you're exerting a lot of force on it, if you slip, you're going to really cut yourself really badly. But this is a legitimate concern that when you're working with wires and tools and cutters, there's no Command Z, there are no layers, and you can really hurt yourself. So just one of the things you have to keep in mind and use common sense. Okay, so I cut this little piece of about 3 feet. So I'm going to take the two ends, line them up, and then work my way down the wire and begin to pinch. So I'm going to pinch this down pretty tight. Okay, next up, I'm going to need my binder, my binding wire. Most craft stores are going to have some variant of this right here. Again, I'm probably going to go about 3 feet. It's not that 3 feet is like some kind of magic number. It just sort of works out. So first things first, I'm going to create like what's essentially like a T-pose with our wireframe, like a stick man. I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to begin to lash it around, you know, back and forth. Really basic, rudimentary weaving. So as you can see, I've got like a pretty good bind here, very strong. You can't separate this. It's not going anywhere. There's a pretty good beginning join for my clavicle, like where my shoulders and head are going to be mounted on top of, and the beginning of my torso. I know this is going to be about where I want my feet to anchor in, but I have to cut our wire down here now, so I can begin to separate our legs. Just create a little bit of a bend so I have an idea of how tall my character is going to be. I'm a big fan of the man on rock composition that you'll see used by artists like Frazetta and N.C. Wyeth Mike Mignola, Justin Sweet. I just love that stuff. Every warrior should have a great big rock to stand on. And probably go to about here with our torso. I have these little small wire cutters that are perfect for floral wire. This is basically a line drawing or a gesture drawing. That's what you're going to be building. And then you refine strong shapes on top of that. My little cross weave back and forth, over and under. Mentioned I'm going to clip these legs. It's never a good idea to clip too early. You know, it's the measure twice, cut once thing. Try to visualize your character over this substructure. You want to actually imagine the final masses on top of the thing. And that'll go a long way towards helping you know how much length you need. And again, you always overestimate on your lengths. So we got a beginning of a dude, stick man swamp thing. It's coming to life. Give myself a lot of length so I can bend it back on itself. And I bend it from that end back to the hip. Basically now I have two parallel lines in my lower legs, which is exactly what you have in your lower leg. You have two parallel lines to your tibia and fibula. You know, see, at some points you'll see the shake because I'm actually exerting a good deal of force. You have to have some hand strength. Oh, you'll see, look, I even drew blood. Gangster, look at that. All for the art. Proko Studios getting real in here. So I'm weaving back and forth with this wire up and down the legs and creating a very strong bind. Just making these legs structurally a little more sound. There's going to be some weight on this sculpt. And all that weight is, you know, is bear it on the legs. I need to be essentially thinking the same way you would about a human body. To a certain degree, you apply it to this armature. Get some of that S-curve in the spine. Definitely want to keep the hips narrower than the shoulders so we can keep those superhero proportions. Now you might ask, why are you doing the green wire on this arm? You don't have two pieces of wire. Without it, you're going to have more trouble getting your initial block out to stay on the armature. One thing to be conscious of when you start to lay in your joints is you want to think about how much mass you're going to build up on top of that. So this is actually not going to be the furthest edge or furthest extreme of my shape because I'm going to be layering clay over the top of that, you know, our muscle mass. So I need to consider how much my character is going to grow once I start to lay that clay on top. Next part, we need to get some feeling for our composition, our larger composition. And so next thing, I have to consider the base. So you see here, I brought these pieces. These are pipe fittings, some big heavy duty PVC pipe fittings that I got from Home Depot. You don't even have to have this. I'll show you something real quick if you look under these sculpts. This is like the plastic cap off some kind of IPA I bought. That then I used aluminum foil to bulk up on top of and then anchor my character into. And once this clay has set, because this epoxy air dries, you do not need to put it in a kiln. You do not need to expose it to extreme temperatures. So you don't need to worry about anything you put in here melting. You can literally use any damn thing you want. I'm gonna have to mass out a larger base with some foil as we go forward, highly likely. So it's actually probably better to use this one. So you consider where my feet are gonna go. Now a Swamp Thing with his proportions, there's a kind of shambling, almost like a Sasquatch, like a Bigfoot vibe, you know, and these kind of ape-like body types, their upper limbs, you know, their arms are actually longer than their legs. That's part of what gives them that knuckle dragger look, you know. And I'm starting to, you know, introduce a little bit of curve to the armature and the femur bone. You've got a curve, it kind of bows out both to the side and forward. That actually helps it, makes it stronger. I'm gonna go down here, I'm gonna bend at my hand and wrist, bend it back on itself. It's gonna dance. However you dance, I don't know how to dance, man. And go down to some feet. The idea is not necessarily to create the actual foot itself, but instead to create something more like a snowshoe shape that I can use to begin to balance the character. The foot will actually could end up being built on top of that after I've anchored it into the base. So I got a pretty long piece of wire, and you might ask, why do you need that much wire for a head? Usually what I'll do, say you're creating something like a lizard man, dinosaur, anything with a tail. I do a lot of creatures with tails. But I'll take a length like this and lay it onto the spine, curve it to match. I'm basically further strengthening my spine. And just like on a human body, there is the most muscle wrapped around your spine. And then what you do is you'd have this like extra length that you could use for the tail. In this case, I'm going to end up clipping. I do make some effort to make sure that the binding is pretty tight. Because at the most narrow portions of the body, which would be like the wrists and ankles, you want the ability to go narrow. It's part of that contrast that makes those forms look interesting. Now we can go to the next part of our process, massing in forms. And this, as we bring in the secret tinfoil. Like if you want to do a lot of sculpting, it can get expensive, but that keeps the cost down for us using this foil. And what's nice is this foil is flexible, so at any time I'm not happy with something, I can start to manipulate it and move it around. You know, there are some artists I really admire that they don't invest a lot of time in armature, and I've worked with students. I'll introduce them to this, idea of the importance of armature, and they will suggest that, they don't really need to do it because such and such famous artist doesn't use a lot of armature. And my answer to that is, you're not that artist yet. It's almost as simple as that. The artists that are able to improvise with a limited, minimal armature they're masters. These are people that have been doing this a very long time. They have a lot of experience. They know how to use their materials. They're very familiar with human physiology, like how to move a body, how to pose a body, what a body can do. Effectively, they're positioned to make that kind of call in their work, to bypass that part of the process or to take shortcuts. But I'd say for beginning sculptors, it's going to increase your probability of a success. It's going to set you up for success. So we've got the beginnings of a rib cage. We've got our clavicle. Again, I'm going to kind of go a little bit overboard because we want to reduce the amount of weight that's going to be on the final. Look at that bit of wire. Oh man, that's sharp as shit. Insinuate some of that like concave, that bowl depression in the clavicle. In your armature, you want to hit the main bony landmarks. As you can see, you're actually using a lot of foil. And that's why you buy it cheap from 99-cent store. You can imagine my mom, there's many times where she would be attempting to prepare dinner and go to lay out some aluminum and find that it had disappeared mysteriously. You don't want to follow the proportions too exactly because you're going to be adding that clay. So I want a smaller skull, 20-30% too small. So next part we're coming to is our base. Lay this on top. It's basically like a large abstract shape. Hold that thought, Swamp Thing. No. No straws, huh? Shit. I think that's the vibes I want to go. So now it's time to prepare to mount him in the character. Now this is in some ways risky, and one of the potential drawbacks you encounter when you're using a more permanent material like the epoxies. Once the stuff is cured, if you want to make a major change, you have to break it. You have to break it and recut, and it's a big pain in the ass. So next thing we need, epoxy putty. Now this is different from our Aves. You'll see here, it says sets hard as steel in 15 to 20 minutes. I use a petroleum jelly, and I will put a thin amount of that, like a film of that, on my hands. And it creates a barrier between me and the chemical. And it still allows me to work with my clay. It also makes the clay not stick to my skin. Now this stuff is going to cure fast. And the reason we're using this, we're going to use it to fix our character armature to our base. But initially we need something to set up fast and very strong that will keep this thing in place so that we can begin to exert some amount of pressure, weight, as we put the epoxy on, the Aves on top. I think you really only have about 5 minutes. Once you've mixed it properly, you'll feel it begin to heat up, and then you know it's beginning to kick. Start to set some down. Okay, good. Got that on quick. And this stuff is pretty cheap. It's about $3 a tube. It's not optimal for actual detail sculpting, so I'm not gonna use this as any part of the outward facing final mass form. This is just useful to strengthen connection points. Ankles, sometimes in a hand if it's going to be holding a weapon. Now again, you don't want to go too thick at the bottom because you got to be aware, I may end up, that may be a part of the ankle or the foot bone. So though I want it to be strong, I really have to be conscious about how thick this is getting. Pro tip, I'll keep caps like this, like I said, for studies. And you could use something like this as like a tiny base. I'll give you an example. Whoosh. I want to extend my base out so I've got a little bit of a slope, and so that I have an area to mount another character. You notice I just brought out a new tool time. Butter knife. This is actually, honest to God, my favorite tool. I like it so much that I have two. I'm using it to create planes. After I've done an initial lay-in, I'll go back and hit it with this flat surface to start to create these faceted planes that catch light and indicate form. New tool time. Crappy scissors. And I'm not going to cut it to be exactly the size of the axe blade because foil is going to go over it. You're going to take this piece of wire and lash it around the handle. This is actually here. I'm going to clip and I'm going to block it with my hand. I only want about as much as is useful to wrap around this axe. Though I've glued this down with the epoxy, I do need to be careful about how much force I exert on this character. So I can't just grab this end and start bending it, or I'm going to pull my character off the base. Hold over here and then exert, force on this little hand. I'm visualizing the mass of a hand and knuckles wrapping around this handle, but I need to be careful I don't go so large that the wire is going to project through. All right, so we've got our armature blocked in here. I'm feeling pretty good about it. But I think it's about time we get into the clay. Time to sling some clay. We've got our Epoxy Sculpt Part A, yellow and a blue. And the idea here is to get us to a green that is evocative of Swamp Thing. In this one variant, I mixed blue, yellow, and a little bit of black. And this one, I used the yellow, blue, and a little bit of gray. It's a little bit lighter and a little bit warmer. And I'm not sure, honestly, exactly what I want to do right now, but we'll see as we get going. Again, back to my simple tools. Whoosh, whoosh, dinner time. But don't eat this stuff. Got this spoon, and I put a little bit of my petroleum jelly on there to help me grab some of this putty without it sticking. And it's a lot like scooping ice cream. Remember, this is a 2-part epoxy. These are actually both part A's. I am just mixing color at this point. I'm going to pre-mix my desired color, then introduce the part B. I'm going to start with less blue and kind of see where it gets me. I'm going to want to mix up quite a bit of this because this is a large base and there are some large muscles that I need to mass in. So I've got a green that I really like. It's very saturated, it's pretty, but I think it's a little bit too saturated. I actually want to neutralize it a bit. I want it a little more gloomy. So just like in oil painting, any painting really, black is a really powerful pigment. It's going to dominate your color scheme or your mix. So I take a very small amount of it that I'm going to introduce to this big lump. And remember, you can always add more, but you cannot remove. So it's important to do this kind of thing incrementally. Part B, this is where the magic happens. And this stuff smells like Doritos, if I kind of get it generally into a sphere. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just means the drying time, the curing time will be either slightly slower or slightly faster. It's like we hear about the process of making a sword, where they fold the steel over on itself. This is the silly putty version of sword making. Now at this point, I'm going to try to pick up speed because for the block in, again, it's not about details. It's like, think about like when you're laying in a painting, what someone like a James Gurney would say, big brush first. Some of the first things I'm going to do are on the base because the sooner our base starts to set up and become strong, the safer our character is as far as like stability. Straps going, hips, shoulders, calf muscle. This little Swamp Thing pecker in there, dude. Little Swamp Thing. In this next pass, I need to be sure to hit the ankles and lower legs and start to think that area out, because if I want to start building up more mass on top, I definitely have to have like done my due diligence, so to speak. I have to make sure that my weight-bearing joints are gonna be able to hold it. So sometimes a way to test the mix, I'll squish it out towards the center, a little thin. And if I don't see any marbling, then I know I'm mixed. See that, like kind of like spreading it out. So like I mentioned, we want to get some stuff going on the lower leg. And you know, in these thin areas where I really want it to be strong, I build it up a little more gradually. You end up with this sort of honeycombing effect, where you have a bunch of small pieces that overlap. And they're also able to be a little more flexible because each one is essentially a small piece. See, so remember earlier I mentioned those little snowshoe shapes I made for the feet. Those were more intended as a way to anchor our character into the base. The feet themselves are sculpted on top. That's why a lot of times I'll make my lower leg a little larger or longer, because I know the lower portion is going to embed into my base. Exaggerate this curve on the top of the quads and out. That's where we start to get into gesture. You can see the upper body starting to bulk. See that? There's a couple things I need to do. One is bring some counterbalance to this arm, and I need to build up my lower legs some more. They're pretty thin still. This guy doesn't do leg day. Get some glutes, some gluteus maximus. Now it's nice because Swamp Thing, the character, lends himself pretty well to this kind of sculpting. And you know, you get these like striations of little bands of putty or clay moving throughout the piece. And it's evocative of vines and moss and lichen, these little fibers, these little like, it's almost like a scumble, like a dry brush scumble in some of these areas. That's happening because the clay is getting a bit dry and tacky. And usually what I do is just add more of the petroleum jelly to my hand. But in this case, there's something kind of cool about it. See, here I'm sort of purposely haphazardly smushing this on in a little bit of a different way. I'm letting it sort of fold as I'm putting it on. And that's creating, to my eye, like an impression of foliage. So you notice I'm not putting any on the right arm yet. I just want to be careful about it, like leaning over to the right. And if I start to put too much clay on that side before it's had some time to cure, I anticipate some sagging. Now, as my clay starts to come in contact with my base down here, I have to be conscious of the fact that it's going to want to cure to the wood. We have a fix for that with our good friend, Mr. Foil. Now it comes one of my favorite parts. The butter knife comes out. And I use this tool to state planes. Now, I don't just want, this gummy soft effect all over the place. I want to create some interplay between hard and soft edges. So you've got a lot of these like concave strokes that are a result of my thumb. And then every once in a while, I want a faceted plane to emerge. And I want some of it on something, but I also want to make some statements about form and hit some of these planes. And you see now it's flatter, it catches light in a different way. Go across the back of tricep, here on the forearm. And I need to lubricate this tool as well, so it will glide across the form. It's almost like a glorified low poly sculpt. In some areas I really want to stylize, like turn that over, and that's not exactly the way that tendon works on the tricep, but it looks dope. And that's what matters to me a lot at this stage, where I sort of like restate curves like this inside of the quad. Push that curve in, and then go back and hit that plane at the front of the knee. One thing to be careful of with this Aves is like, it gets kind of heavy and it will start to sag. At a certain point I'll like where it's at and I'll let it sit, but I'll come back to it. I'll kind of like be in the room and sort of like circle back as I'm doing other crap to make sure it's maintaining form. So you kind of have to babysit it. Otherwise you're gonna get that saggy diaper butt on Swamp Thing, and that's not cool. I have a smaller plane on this tool over here, and it's sort of like now I'm moving to a smaller brush. That's basically what I'm doing. I'm like painting, creating strokes, like smaller facets. You can see it, like how some of it, the gumminess It's one of the I'd say one of the drawbacks to this material. But some guys, they won't begin working with it until it's actually kind of bypassed that stage in the curing process. So they'll like mix some Aves up and then let it sit for an hour or something in some cases until it's a little bit tougher and can hold its form. It's also part of the reason why it's so important to build up a proper armature. Then you have less weight, less pure putty weight, and you don't have to babysit it as much. I'm passing my fingers to bring some texture into this because again, some of it gets a little gummy. Areas are going to catch light and look organic and be a different surface material than what I'm seeing on the rest of the character. So it creates some movement in the piece. Go back and hit my edges so I get kind of like a clean framing element near the bottom, just like the frame on a painting. You get clean lines that frame the thing and create the perception of finish. Laying in some big strokes. I'm looking to accommodate another character. What's nice about this putty when it's curing is you can very easily introduce some more bulking just directly with some foil. I mean, typically I will let this sit overnight, like almost for sure. Wake up the next day and it's hard as a rock and ready to begin a second. And I like to do that because it ensures that I'm not gonna like wipe out any of my passages, like any of the little marks and shapes that I've made that I've come to be fond of. Like part of what I like about the Aves is that every mark is recorded. You get to see this sort of like heritage of the piece frozen in time, in the same way you get in a bronze sculpture. I begin turning from this ellipse, this little piece of wood, when my sculpture is in this like delicate period. I kind of want to stop putting my hands all over it at this point. You may notice that this new batch I've mixed up is a little bit lighter. Sometimes it's those little modulations that, they bring a lot of life to the piece. Oh no, he's naked, don't look at the back. Basically the back gives me a place to put my fingers, so it's good to have it. It's kind of like a temporary handle. But I'm kind of getting distracted. I need to spend some time on this leg. This area is going to be the main weight-bearing portion of the piece. So there's some like cheats I can do to help buttress it. You can build up these muscles at the top, these like tendons at the top of the foot. So I kind of like, from this Bernie swamp thing, I like this, it's almost like a hood. You get this shape, over the eyebrows. Part of what's fun about Impressionism is you have all these, you have a silhouette, a gesture when you squint at it, but then you'll get all these secondary forms that are a result of all these expressive passages of clay. I've been honing in on this idea of pulp Impressionism. It's basically Impressionist execution with nerdy subject matter, to put it plainly. It's been important to me to figure out a way to articulate what I'm after to people. When you're after something new, nobody's ever really seen that before. They don't really know what the hell you're doing. Like, what are you doing? Why aren't there details on that, Like, that's not good. It doesn't look like what I'm used to. It's common to have that experience. And so you have to sort of like bring people along for the ride and help them, try to see what you're getting at, see if they'll get on board with it. He is leaning, I can tell he's pulling up this foot. This inner toe is slowly raising up. If the piece can cure, you could always like lift the base slightly and raise it up like a wedge. If I've got a pipette, he's only got these 2 points of anchoring in the piece. He's going to be less stable for that reason with all this weight. So usually I find some like sneaky way to kind of link it to some other stabilizing element. In this case, it's probably going to be the little boy. We're going to start working on our second character, at least start the armature for that. And so I can embed him in the base while the base is still curing. So he'll have a strong, he'll be anchored in very firmly. The kid is going to be pretty skinny. So I really need to be conscious of how thick the armature gets when I'm wrapping wire, especially around like the wrists and ankles. And kids shouldn't have very broad shoulders. You don't want the shoulders to project out too much. That's again, it's another like signature of like maturity in males, like broad shoulders. So as far as like using your shapes and communication, if you want to communicate like this juvenile quality, basically you want pretty narrow shoulders, thin neck, big head, big ears. Basically you make them look a little bit goofy. That's part of the fun of it. And so I know I need to decrease the length of these legs to embed them in the base, but I don't want to cut off somewhat incrementally because I don't want to plug them in here, but I might have to extend my base out a tiny bit to accommodate this. Use this. This will be the beginning of my armature for my pumpkin. I might need to mix up some more of my quick steel to do this real quick. Again, it's to expedite the process. Like this stuff cures so fast and strong. I will cover this with green clay later. And I'm going to use some of this while I can real quick here so I need to do a spike on the back of the sack, because I kind of forgot that I'd had the spike in the little shape curving piece. It's already curing. Whoa, this stuff is ridiculous. When I was younger in college, I went to an event that was hosted by Marshall, where he had Bernie Wrightson come and give a talk, and he talked about his Swamp Thing work, and I could tell it was kind of like an honor, you know. They were like friends or something, you know. I like the idea of, you know, Swamp Thing is Bernie, Marshall is Marshall, and they're buddies out there kicking butt. I love those monkey ears. And little boys are a lot like little monkeys. They often pretend to be monkeys. It's like if Gollum from Lord of the Rings was not entirely ugly. This is actually probably one of those times where I should have some reference of shorts up. When I look at my study, that's kind of why I do a study. If I can look at what's working over there, and I made his shorts over there very more like little Boy Scout shorts or something, like kind of tight actually and short. Trying to decide if I can have the kid's arm in contact with Swamp Thing's leg, like holding onto it. One thing I want to make sure is I don't hit too much texture in the kid, like in the mark making. It's like opposite from Swamp Thing. Right now I have a lot because my clay is actually starting to get kind of gummy, not as malleable. Maybe it's kind of funny if it's overly large, like he's pinching it with his face, like kind of trying to hug it. I kind of like that. With my hand here, again, I just want to create the like impression of, I'm not interested in like digits. So for something like this handle, I basically I treat it almost like a tortilla, like putting a little tortilla and wrapping it around it, like a little green burrito, but not like the restaurant. What I do first is basically apply what's equivalent to like a primer of clay on the handle, like a thin coat, and then you go back and you beef up areas and then reinforce hard edges. Because the axe has a somewhat similar function as the boy. It's like it's like a balancing element, where Swamp Thing is this very organic form, and the axe is this hard, it's a man-made object. It's hard, angular lines. So I'm just trying to create this sort of like secondary shape on the base. That's cool. Like a rim or a lip moving around the piece. That'll cast a shadow. Expression on the kid. Okay, I want it very simple. There's parts that I just like so much. This kind of grim. And there's our anchor point, just connected. A little bit of putty. The boy's hand to Swamp Thing's leg. And that single-handedly is going to make Swamp Thing a lot stronger. Little hillbilly hat. But I want that sort of pop tat. I do that a lot. My son does it. It's kind of funny. It's like you're letting your head breathe or something. This is where Dremel tool come in really useful. In a second sitting, I can come back and smooth out areas. The way line weight is used in a drawing will do a lot to unify a picture. Thickness of forms will do a lot in a sculpture. And if his hat is incredibly thin compared to the rest of the sculpt, I think it will actually stand out. So I have to kind of choose strands of clay. That's all I'm doing here. And once this is actually fully cured, that's what we'll do in the real detailing phase, like in Swamp Thing's face. We'll just basically be using very small bands of clay. Some suggestion of the orbits. You start with a bigger socket, and then you use the small bits of clay to come back in. There's a nasal cavity, which we'll have to build out, like it actually projects out. So those will not remain that large, but it gives me like basically a big, bold, deep shadow shape that I can then, at my discretion, I can go back and cover some of it up. Hey guys, so I think we're gonna call it a day. I'm getting to a point of diminishing returns or start to get a little bit obsessive about the mark making, and clay is starting to cure. So thanks for being with us today. Again, this is Scott Flanders, and we're here at Proko Studios. We had a good day of sculpting.
Man, sculpting is so intimidating. You know what's not intimidating? Building a website from scratch using Squarespace. When I was engaged, I used Squarespace to build my wedding website. Their easy-to-use tools like automatic image scaling made it a breeze to upload engagement photos and create a beautiful site in a matter of hours. My family and friends gave me compliments about it. So whether you're getting hitched, selling art, or just need a place to showcase your work, Squarespace has you covered. Check out Squarespace for a free trial, and if you like what they have to offer, you can save an additional 10% off your purchase by going to squarespace.com/Proko. The link is also in the description.
Hey guys, this is Scott again. So you might have caught on at the end of the video, I wasn't entirely pleased with the way the sculpture turned out. I wasn't able to hit some of the focal points I intended to. There were some choices I made with the composition that I'm not stoked about, and I basically ran out of time. So I was thinking, I'm doing this month of monster sculpting thing, #Monstober. That's basically like an answer to Inktober, where Inktober is sort of focused on 2D art. This is intended to create an opportunity for those of us who are interested in slinging clay around for us to participate in a similar event. And I was thinking my last entry for the month could be a good opportunity to revisit the Swamp Thing sculpt. So check back in on October 31st at ShapeCarver on Instagram, and hopefully you'll see a brand new and improved version of this sculpture. All right, thanks a lot guys. Hope you're all doing well. Take care and happy Halloween. Bye-bye.
A huge thanks to Scott for the hard work he put in recording this, and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. Make sure to hit the subscribe and bell icon so you don't miss part 3 of Scott's series, where he does an oil painting of Swamp Thing.